The story of Indonesia does not begin with flags or nations but with footsteps, very old footsteps. Long before anyone thought of drawing a map, ancient humans were already making this sprawling collection of islands their home. We call one of them Java Man, a distant ancestor who walked these lands perhaps more than 1,000,000 years ago. These were not just a few scattered wanderers. Over immense stretches of time, waves of migration brought different peoples, each adding their own thread to the human tapestry. They settled in lush valleys along winding rivers, and on the coasts of countless islands, learning to live with the dramatic power of volcanoes and the generous bounty of the tropical forests. Centuries upon centuries passed and small communities grew into something more complex. Ideas about leadership and faith began to take root, carried on the winds and sea currents from a powerful neighbor, India. The concepts of Hinduism and Buddhism arrived not through conquest but through trade and intellectual exchange. Local chiefs and strongmen saw in these new religions a way to elevate their status, to become not just rulers but god-kings. This fusion of local beliefs and Indian cosmology gave rise to Indonesia's first great kingdoms, powerful states that commanded loyalty, built magnificent temples, and left behind legacies etched in stone that we can still marvel at today. For centuries, a powerful secret lay hidden in a tiny corner of the Indonesian archipelago. On a small cluster of islands known as the Moluccas, the Spice Islands, cloves, nutmeg, mace. In medieval Europe, these spices were worth more than their weight in gold. They were used to flavor food, they were used as medicine, they were used as perfume, and they were a symbol of immense wealth. Yet for the longest time, no European knew their exact origin. Arab traders fiercely guarded the routes. Indian traders kept the secrets of supply. Malay traders moved spices across the archipelago. A long, mysterious supply chain snaked across the seas. By the time spices reached Venice, prices had soared. Or Lisbon, the profits were astronomical. That tantalizing mystery and promise of profit spurred a new age of global exploration. European monarchs and merchants began funding daring voyages. The quest drove the great maritime expeditions of the 15th and 16th centuries. Christopher Columbus sailed west. Vasco da Gama sailed east around Africa. When the Portuguese finally arrived in the Moluccas in the early 1500s, they thought they'd found the Garden of Eden, the air thick with the scent of cloves. The arrival of the Portuguese marked a dramatic turning point. They came with cannons, tall, heavily armed ships, and a crusading zeal to dominate trade and spread their faith. They built stone forts across the islands. They forged alliances with some local sultans against others, and used brute force to try to monopolize spice production. This shattered the relatively balanced trade system that had existed for centuries. Out of the chaotic scramble for spices, one entity emerged as the most ruthless and effective, the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, or VOC. Founded in 1602, the VOC was no ordinary trading firm. It was a groundbreaking mega-corporation, granted extraordinary powers by the Dutch government. It could wage war, build forts, negotiate treaties, and administer justice. It was a state within a state, with its own army and navy, driven by a single goal: maximize profit for shareholders in Amsterdam, no matter the human cost. The VOC's strategy was brutal and systematic. Unlike the Portuguese, the Dutch didn't focus on spreading religion. They sought an absolute monopoly on the spice trade. In the Banda Islands, the world's only source of nutmeg, resistance provoked horror. When the Bandanese resisted VOC contracts, Jan Pieterszoon Cohen enacted near genocide. Islands were depopulated, leaders executed, people enslaved or driven away, replaced by Dutch-controlled slave plantations. The message was clear: resist and face overwhelming force. By the end of the 18th century, the once mighty VOC was rotting from the inside out. Corruption was rampant, and the company was crippled by debt. In 1799 it was formally dissolved, and its vast territories were nationalized by the Dutch government. What had been a corporate asset now became a formal colony, the Dutch East Indies. This transition marked a significant change. The goal was no longer just a trade monopoly. It became direct administration and systematic exploitation of agricultural wealth for the Dutch state. The Dutch crown, not a company, was now the master. The 19th century brought the Kulturstelsel, the cultivation system. Javanese villagers were forced to use large portions of their land and labor, often beyond legal limits. Coffee, sugar, indigo. These crops were sold on the world market for huge profits flowing to the Dutch treasury. The system funded Holland's industrialization and balanced its budget, but it caused widespread famine and hardship in Java. Peasants had less time and land to grow rice for their families, with devastating consequences. Resistance to Dutch rule was constant. Across the archipelago, local leaders and communities rose in defiance. In Java, Prince Diponegoro led a grueling 5-year war, 1825-1830. In Sumatra, the Padri War, the long, drawn-out Aceh War. The Dutch, with superior military tech and organization, eventually suppressed these revolts, but only after decades of brutal warfare. The world was plunged into chaos. World War II erupted. Southeast Asia felt the tremors. The Netherlands fell to Germany in 1940. The East Indies were left vulnerable. Japan, an emerging imperial power. It sought a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Japan saw its opportunity. The archipelago was rich in resources, oil, rubber, other resources vital for Japan's war machine. In early 1942, Japanese forces launched a swift, devastating invasion. The Dutch colonial army crumbled. It fell in a matter of weeks. The sight of Asians defeating a European colonial power shocked people. Initially, many Indonesians welcomed the Japanese as liberators. The Japanese propaganda machine worked overtime. Slogans like, "Asia for the Asians." They presented themselves as older brothers freeing younger siblings. They put Dutch and other European civilians into brutal internment camps. That shattered the myth of white racial superiority. For the first time, nationalist leaders were released from prison. Sukarno, Muhammad Hatta. They were brought into a form of collaboration with the new rulers. The Japanese allowed the Indonesian flag to be flown. Indonesia Raya was allowed to be sung. However, the reality of the occupation soon turned grim. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered to the Allied powers, creating a sudden and uncertain void in Indonesia. The Dutch were not yet in a position to return. The Japanese were instructed to maintain order. It was a critical, fleeting window of opportunity. Indonesian youth groups, impatient and radicalized by the occupation, urged Sukarno and Muhammad Hatta to act immediately. After tense hesitation, the youths dramatically kidnapped the two leaders to force action. The decision was made on the morning of August 17, 1945, in front of his modest home in Jakarta. Sukarno read the Proklamasi. Indonesia had declared its independence, Merdeka, freedom. The declaration was only the beginning. The struggle would be long and bloody. British troops arrived to disarm the Japanese. Dutch administrators and soldiers followed, determined to restore their empire. This sparked the Indonesian National Revolution, a 4-year war of fierce fighting and delicate diplomacy. Ragtag Indonesian freedom fighters rose up armed with bamboo spears, armed with captured Japanese rifles against well-equipped Dutch forces. Surabaya became the symbol of heroic resistance. Its people rose against British troops in late 1945. In late 1949, the Dutch conceded and transferred sovereignty to the Republic of Indonesia. The early years of independence under Sukarno were vibrant and chaotic. A multi-party parliamentary democracy was attempted, but it was marked by political instability, with cabinets rising and falling frequently. Sukarno, frustrated with the messiness of democracy, dissolved parliament in 1959 and instituted his own system of guided democracy. He balanced the three main power blocks of the time: the nationalist religious, mostly Islamic, groups, the increasingly powerful Indonesian Communist Party or PKI. While he remained a popular figurehead, the economy faltered, and deep political tensions simmered beneath the surface, creating a volatile and dangerous situation. This explosive mix finally detonated in 1965. On the night of September 30th, a group of junior army officers calling themselves the 30 September Movement kidnapped and murdered 6 high-ranking army generals, claiming they were preventing a CIA-backed coup. The army's leadership was thrown into disarray. Into this power vacuum stepped a quiet but ambitious general named Suharto. He quickly took command of the army, blamed the coup attempt on the PKI, and unleashed a horrific wave of violence. Over the next year, an anti-communist purge swept across the country, resulting in the mass killing of an estimated 500,000 to 1 million people suspected of being communists or sympathizers. For 32 years, Suharto's new order seemed unshakable, a regime built on the twin pillars of military power and economic growth. But in 1997, a financial crisis that began in Thailand swept across Asia, hitting Indonesia with devastating force. The Indonesian rupiah collapsed, businesses went bankrupt, and millions of people were thrown out of work. The economic miracle that had been the main justification for Suharto's authoritarian rule evaporated overnight. The social contract was broken, food prices soared, and popular anger, long suppressed, began to boil over into riots and protests across the country. The crisis emboldened a new generation of student activists who had grown up entirely under the new order. They took to the streets demanding reform. They called for an end to corruption, collusion, nepotism, known by the acronym KKN, and most daringly, for Suharto to step down. The protests grew larger and more defiant. The turning point came in May 1998, when security forces shot and killed 4 student protesters at Trisakti University in Jakarta. This act of violence sparked massive riots in the capital and other cities, and the country teetered on the brink of complete chaos. Faced with a collapsed economy, mass protests, and crucially, the loss of support from his own political and military allies, the once all-powerful Suharto found himself isolated. On May 21, 1998, in a televised address to the nation, President Suharto announced his resignation. To get a good grasp of modern Indonesia, you need to understand something a bit tricky. How can a country with so much variety stay together? It's a land with over 17,000 islands spread out as far as from London to Baghdad. More than 300 different groups of people live there, speaking over 700 different languages. Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, old traditional beliefs. But even with all this amazing mix, one country was made. Being ruled by other countries fighting for freedom, Bahasa Indonesia Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. This old Javanese saying unity and diversity isn't just a catchy phrase, it's how the country really works. This rich culture is Indonesia's biggest treasure. Bali dancer batik from Java Torajan Funeral House in Sulawesi Padang meal from Sumatra. Every island and every community has its own special traditions, music, food, art. From the first steps of Java Man to its current role as a lively democracy and a key player in the world, Indonesia's journey is a strong reminder of human resilience and creating one identity from many cultures. Its history isn't just a story for Indonesians, but for the whole world.